Hi, my name is Gregor and I'm an enterprise strategist with Amazon Web Services based in Singapore. As enterprise strategists, we frequently advise our customers on their cloud journeys. Naturally, the word transformation is a frequent mention during such conversations, as most of our customers move to the cloud in the context of a larger transformation. The words surrounding transformation are usually disruption and innovation. These words describe our customers' ambitions, but there's quite a bit more behind them. So today I want to share my thoughts about what we learned when we assist enterprises to navigate our existing, but sometimes also uncertain times. One word, however, precedes most of these conversations, and that's the word digital, usually in the context of a digital transformation. So first I want to get on my tiny soapbox and share my thoughts on digitalizations. The so-called digital world brings us a plethora of innovations and makes our lives and work easier. However, there is a slight problem, and that is we made most things digital about 3 or 4 decades ago. In the 70s, we replaced paper and slide rules with electronic calculators. In the 80s, we replaced the cassette tapes with CDs, and in the 90s, letters gave way to email. Well, and these digital replacements were superior to the analog ones in almost every aspect. Right? They were faster, more accurate, and most of the time also more dependable. But one thing they didn't do. They did not change the way we think and work. Right? Instead of putting the tape in, we just put the CD in the player, right? And we also checked our electronic mailbox in the morning to see whether we received a letter. Now that changed when streaming replaced the CD and chat and social networks replaced email, and for example Wikipedia replaced the electronic dictionary. Those products were not digital copies. Those items fundamentally changed the model based on digital technologies. And that's what we want to think about when we use the term digital. So with this little preamble, let's start. And the story usually begins with a disruption. When we speak to our enterprise customers about transformation, the trigger is usually in a disruption in the industry. Digging up our Latin a little bit, we find that disruption means as much as breaking apart. Well, that's a fairly big deal when traditionally successful industries are being disrupted. And often this takes place because a so-called digital disruptor has managed to use the digital technology in a way that opens up new business models and challenges existing ones. The danger is that most incumbent businesses establish their market position by being more optimized than their competitors. This efficiency brings bigger margins, which can then help them increase market share and trigger further economies of scale, leading to a nice upward spiral. Right? And that works handsomely until someone comes along who does not play by the established rules. So when somebody passes us because their engine moves faster than ours, we do what we do best. We optimize. Well, we put more coals on the fire and more pressure on the boiler. Well, that's taken us to all crises before, right? And it works, right? You can eke out another 10 miles per hour or even 15. Sadly, though, we know where this strategy leads. It doesn't lead to a transformation, but it leads to a burst boiler. And that is the same in organizations. Do more with less, we're often told, because the digitals can do it too. But if we forget that the digitals don't run on pressurized steam, this won't do much but lead to more frustration. So this leads us to our first important insight. Disruption is not something that you can counter by optimizing. Disruption breaks things apart. It changes the rules of the game. And if somebody still plays by the old rules to just squeeze out a few more percentage points, they have pretty much already lost. And this message hits particularly hard for industries that are very much based on optimizing and streamlining, like many manufacturing, automotive businesses. Now, admittedly, steam engines are a bit of a thing of the past. So let's take a time leap. Let's go about 100 years forward. Well, we go to the 1970s. And we found that the US automotive manufacturers, right, they had a pretty good time. They were sitting on a quasi-monopoly when a major disruption happened. Right, Japanese manufacturers entered the market, first with little motorcycles and then with passenger cars. And these cars were superior to the domestic ones in almost every aspect. Right? They had better performance, better gas mileage, better build quality, were better equipped, and sold for a lower price. Now, that's something you could call disruption, right? That's when things break apart. Now, what would an incumbent automaker do? Right? They'll take one of these cars, take it apart, analyze it very closely, right? So they want to learn and replicate their competitors' success. Unfortunately, they'd find very little because the essence of that disruption wasn't in the finished vehicle, but in the manufacturing plant. And US plants dedicated up to a quarter of their floor space to quality assurance, essentially rework. This aimed at improving quality, but it was based on a very important assumption that quality is something you add at the end. The Japanese manufacturers worked very differently. Toyota introduced the so-called andon cord, right, that would allow line workers to stop the assembly line, essentially the worst thing that you can do in a car plant. However, once you realize that a problem in the manufacturing setup would be replicated 1,000 times or maybe even 10,000 times, stopping the line to resolve a problem suddenly makes sense. As long as you consider quality as something that is built in and not something that's added on later. And that was the true disruption. But you're never going to find that by looking at the finished car. By the way, Amazon also has an andon cord. Returns are an apparent problem for any online retailer. Right? So one of Jeff Bezos' favorite stories is when he attended a customer service call, and before the customer even stated her problem, the agent told him the table scratched. And Jeff was baffled, right, until the agent told him that these tables always come back scratched because they just have poor packaging. So we built an electronic equivalent of the andon cord. Right? If we find a problem, this andon cord pulls the product off the marketplace instantly until the problem is addressed. And yes, this costs revenue, but unhappy customers and returns cost more. So for us at Amazon, quality is also built in. And this leads us to lesson number 2. The essence of most disruptions is not visible from the finished product. The true innovation, most of the time, is hidden behind. And that is why transformation is so important. Right? So we don't end up bursting the boiler and we understand the source of the disruption. Now, our Latin helps us a tiny bit again, right? And it tells us that to transform means to change shape. So it's not a matter of fresh coat of paint over the old house. It is rather taking the house apart and putting it back together in a different shape. Is that easy to do? Certainly not. Is it necessary? Yes. So there's no wonder that we see a flurry of these transformation projects and transformation initiatives. Sadly, though, a majority of these initiatives never reach the intended goals. And that's a big problem because a failing or transformation can pose an existential threat to the whole organization. So what's going on here? The trap in which many organizations fall is that they adopt new transformative technology without adjusting their existing processes. And this leads to weird and unlucky scenarios like those in the Locomotive Acts that we had in the UK in the second half of the 19th century. They prescribed that every self-propelled vehicle of sorts had to be led by a human waving a red flag. Well, that's not exactly the way to speed up with your new technology, is it? Right? This is about as meaningful as adopting a cloud computing platform and then gating each server that's meant to be provisioned with a 2-week approval process. And sadly, such scenarios also exist. So we arrive at lesson number 3. If you apply the old way of thinking and working to the new technology, you're not transforming anything. Or put it another way, if you carry your existing processes into the cloud, it's unlikely you're actually getting a cloud. More likely, you get another data center. And I've yet to meet one AT executive who is wishing for another data center. And that's why it's so critical to understand the real potentials of technologies like cloud computing or machine learning. But even this transformation is really just a means to an end. And that end is faster and more efficient innovation. We'll dig into our Latin once again. To innovate derives from the word novum, making something new, something different. Right? And that's exactly what we need to be doing to be successful in the digital world. The words that come up in this context are usually experimentation and agility. And once again, there's a good bit behind those slogans, so we'll have a closer look. As we saw earlier, traditional enterprises base their success on their ability to optimize. Right? That's how they gain efficiency and a competitive advantage. Those are the rules of the economies of scale. And when we speak to such organizations about experimentation and agility, they often perceive them as the opposite. Right? Isn't it much easier to do it once right rather than run 10 different experiments? And that is an understandable point of view. But the reality is that the two models are much more similar than one would assume. In uncertain times, in times of rapid change, experimentation is indeed more efficient than keeping on marching in the wrong direction. I like to use an analogy from motorsports. If you go in a straight line, you need a lot of horsepower. Think about a drag race. Right? But if you're driving a rally car on an obstacle course, you need very precise steering. You need agility. A well-balanced vehicle with precise steering is going to go faster on such a course. It is more efficient. And the last time I checked our business environment, it doesn't look like a drag strip. It looks like an obstacle course. So to illustrate this a little bit further, both approaches are based on a cycle. To optimize something, we look at what we can improve. We need transparency, right? And based on this data, we decide what we want to change, and we implement it via project delivery, and we keep repeating that cycle. Now we gain two important insights. The first one is, if any part of this cycle is missing, there is no value delivery. Right? That's the definition of the value chain. We need all three parts. The second part is, the innovation cycle for a dynamic environment looks essentially the same, right? You deliver an experiment. Through the transparency, you monitor how it behaves, and then you decide based on that data what to do with this experiment, and you run the next one. The only real difference is in the speed which the cycle spins. Here we need to move from months and sometimes even years to weeks or maybe months. And that's where AWS is perfectly positioned to help you. And that's because we bring this way of working to our customers. We call that data-driven enterprise, or sometimes data-driven everything. And that reminds you that we bring a lot more than just infrastructure. Yeah, of course, we have numerous services that accelerate software delivery, right? There's AWS Code Commit, there's AWS Code Deploy, we have runtime environments like AWS Lambda, or the Amazon Elastic Kubernetes Service, EKS. Right? With these services, you can efficiently implement modern delivery approaches, like automation or continuous integration, continuous delivery. On top of that, we offer the broadest set of databases, analytics, and machine learning that you can gain the transparency and derive insight from your data. But that's not all. We also support you in the culture change with programs like Culture of Innovation Workshop. So that means we are really with you across the whole innovation cycle. And thus we have seen that in a short-lived, fast-moving world, agility really is the new efficiency. Right? A rally car with direct and precise steering will win the race on an obstacle course. However, there's one more factor in this metaphor, and that is fuel economy. Unfortunately, a vehicle that runs higher RPMs will consume more gas. And that's not good when in times of pandemics and global uncertainty, right? When enterprises need the agility and innovation, but more so than ever, also have to watch their cost base. But luckily, technologies like cloud computing can help us define, overcome these laws of physics if we use them well. And that means we can innovate faster and cheaper if we can work the right way. And the first way we do that is to break the big projects, the big teams, and the long timelines into smaller projects, smaller teams, and shorter intervals. And the keywords here are microservices, 2 pizza teams, that's our name for the optimal team size, and agile sprints. In doing so, you'll gain flexibility, agility, and you reduce the cost of experimentation. But careful, most enterprises are set up to optimize locally. They optimize per department or per cost center. Well, that simplifies many things, but it has one massive drawback. The sum of local optima is rarely or never a global optimum. So despite having smaller pieces, you need to look and optimize end to end. You need to measure the ultimate value delivery to the customer, not just how many lines of code you shipped or servers you migrated. In most cases, the IT line items, those have been scrutinized over and over. You can maybe get another few percentage point out of those. But if you look at the big picture from a new point of view, you really do have a chance to defy the laws of physics. Now, of course, we have one question. Why didn't we always work this way? And the answer is relatively simple. Because we lacked the tools. And that's where we come back to the AWS cloud. We reduce the friction of software delivery. And we assure consistency at high speeds, thanks to automation. We gain full transparency and use intelligent insights to better understand your data. And all these are parts of the AWS cloud platform. They're fully operated, secured, and available in an elastic pricing model. So we saw that the new technologies, they enable you to work in different ways. You can move faster, you can make quicker iterations, deploy more often, run smaller teams, all the while maintaining or improving quality and reducing cost thanks to automation. So I mentioned Amazon Web Services several times. Our platform has actually become so comprehensive that it's become difficult to show it in an entirety on a single slide. Suffice it to say that we have over 175 services in full production. And this makes us the cloud provider with the broadest set of functionality, the biggest community of developers and partners, and the longest operational experience in running and securing cloud services. And that is good news, because you don't have to build the innovation engine from scratch. You can leave the undifferentiated heavy lifting to us so you can focus on what you do best, deliver value to your customer and your organizations. And to show you that you're standing on very solid ground, we operate availability zones around the globe in 24 regions. 3 more are already announced, and we'll continue adding as we keep seeing tremendous demand and potential. So, good news. Well, transformation truly is hard work, but it's necessary to change the rules of the game to innovate faster at lower cost, and a majority of the piece of the work is already done for you. Now that concludes our little whirlwind tour of what's behind common slogans like disruption, transformation, and innovation. And because we have accompanied many organizations along this journey, we not only bring the technology, but also the experience to be on your side throughout the whole journey. So that way there's no boilers bursting, and we can look and see what's really behind the disruption. We also help you adjust your processes to really unleash the potential of the new technology. And we help you understand the changing role of IT so we can shed some of that mental ballast. And we will also find that agility is in fact the new efficiency, and we can show you new ways of working based on a solid information platform. Thank you very much.